It all started with a single, harsh kick to a woman who was only trying to protect her dog. And the man who saw it, a man who had witnessed the very worst of human cruelty in the darkest corners of the world, knew in that frozen, silent moment that the world of these two bullies was about to be shattered forever. If you believe in justice, you're going to want to see this story through. Subscribe and join us. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the sleepy town of Cedar Creek, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was that quiet, liminal hour between the late lunch rush and the early dinner crowd at Maggie's Diner, a classic American establishment with gleaming chrome trim, red vinyl booths, and the lingering, comforting smell of coffee and grilled onions. The diner was a slice of living nostalgia, a place where time seemed to move just a little slower. Inside, the only sounds were the low hum of the refrigerated display case, the gentle clinking of porcelain, and the soft, shuffling footsteps of a young woman named Alara. She moved with a quiet efficiency between the tables, her retro blue waitress uniform crisp despite her long shift. Her name tag, slightly crooked, read Alara. Her eyes, the color of a calm sea, held a gentle tiredness, but they also held a deep, unwavering kindness. To the few customers scattered in the booths, she was just the sweet, hard-working waitress. They didn't know her story. They didn't know that the small, makeshift bed she'd fashioned from an old towel behind the counter was for the most important thing in her life. Tucked safely in that nook was Kaiser, a German shepherd puppy of only 10 weeks. He was all oversized paws, floppy ears, and a curious, wet nose. His coat was a soft blend of blacks and tans, and his eyes held that innocent, trusting gaze unique to puppies. Elora had found him abandoned near the dumpster out back a month ago, shivering and alone. She'd taken him in, named him after her grandfather, and he'd become her shadow, her confidant, her little piece of joy in a life that had demanded more than its fair share of resilience. She was saving every spare penny, dreaming of a small apartment that allowed pets, of a life where she and Kaiser could have a real home. For now, the diner was their sanctuary, and Maggie, the elderly owner, had reluctantly agreed to let Kaiser stay, so long as he stayed out of sight and out of trouble. He was a good boy, sleeping most of the time, or quietly chewing on a toy Alara had bought him. Sitting at the far end of the counter, nursing a black coffee, was a man who seemed carved from granite. He was dressed in the crisp, sharp lines of a Navy SEAL service uniform, the trident pin gleaming on his chest. His name was Master Chief Finn Corrigan. He was a man of few words and immense stillness. His posture was perfect but not stiff. It was the relaxed readiness of a predator who knew his own strength. His hands, wrapped around the warm mug, were crisscrossed with scars and caluses that told silent stories of ropes, rifles, and hardship. His eyes, a piercing, cool blue, scanned the room not with paranoia, but with a practiced, analytical calm. He was on leave, driving cross-country to visit family he hadn't seen in over a year, and he'd stopped at Maggie's on a whim, drawn by its old-fashioned charm. He'd watched Alara work. He saw the gentle way she interacted with her customers, the extra moment she took with an elderly regular, the way her face would light up with a genuine smile when she glanced back at the hidden puppy. He saw a good person, and in his line of work, you learned to recognize that quickly. He left a generous tip under his saucer, a silent acknowledgement of her hard work. The peace was shattered by the roar of a souped-up engine and the slam of two-car doors. A moment later, the diner's bell jangled aggressively as two young men swaggered in. They were clad in matching varsity jackets from a local college, their letterman patches screaming of athletic privilege. The taller one, Brad, had a smug, entitled smirk plastered on his face. His companion, Chad, was broader, with a brutish confidence that came from a lifetime of being the biggest guy in the room. They flopped noisily into a booth, their loud voices and boisterous laughter immediately disrupting the diner's tranquil atmosphere. Alara's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly, but she pasted on her professional smile and approached their table with notepad in hand. "What can I get for you gentlemen today?" she asked, her voice steady. They ignored her, continuing their loud conversation about a party. After a long, dismissive moment, Brad finally looked her up and down. "2 burgers." "Well done, and make it quick, sweetheart, we got places to be." His tone was dripping with condescension. Elara simply nodded, wrote down the order, and turned to leave. It was then that a tiny, curious whimper came from behind the counter. Kaiser, stirred by the loud noises, had poked his little head out to see what was happening. His ears were perked, his head tilted in puppy curiosity. Well, what do we have here? Chad sneered, leaning out of the booth. The help bringing her mutt to work. That's a health code violation, isn't it, Brad? Brad laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Probably infested with fleas. Looks like a little rat. A flush of anxiety crept up Alara's neck. He's no trouble, he stays back here. I'll just get him settled. Her voice was tight as she moved quickly to intercept, but the damage was done. The bullies had found a target. As she knelt to gently guide Kaiser back to his bed, the puppy, intrigued by the new voices, took a few wobbly steps out from behind the counter. It was an innocent, exploratory move. But to Brad and Chad, it was an invitation. Brad slid out of the booth and took a menacing step forward. I don't like dogs, he said, his voice low and threatening. Especially ugly ones. Please, Alara said, her voice shaking now. He's just a puppy. He's not bothering anyone. She moved to stand between Brad and Kaiser, her arms slightly spread in a protective gesture. From his seat at the counter, Finn Corrigan didn't move a muscle. But his coffee mug was now still in his hand, his focus entirely on the scene unfolding behind him, which he watched in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser. His breathing remained even, but his eyes had changed. The calm blue had hardened into the color of glacial ice. He was assessing, calculating, his mind running through scenarios with the cold, detached efficiency of a tactical supercomputer. He saw the power imbalance, the aggression, the fear. He was a storm contained within a single still man. Chad joined his friend, the two of them now looming over Alara. You need to control your animal, Chad spat. Alara, her heart hammering against her ribs, bent down to scoop up Kaiser. But as she did, Brad made a sudden, fake lunge forward, stomping his foot hard on the linoleum floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the tense space. Kaiser, terrified, yelped and scrambled backwards, slipping from Alara's grasp. The puppy, panicked, tried to run back to the safety of his nook, but instead darted towards the bully's legs. What happened next seemed to unfold in brutal, slow motion. As Kaiser scurried past Chad's heavy work boots, Chad, with a cruel, deliberate smirk, drew back his leg. Stupid mutt. He grunted, and he kicked out. It wasn't a full-force kick, not from a man his size, but it was enough. The toe of his boot connected solidly with the puppy's small rib cage. A high-pitched, pained yelp sliced through the air, a sound of pure, uncomprehending agony. Kaiser was sent tumbling sideways, skidding across the floor, where he lay whimpering and shaking. A sound tore from Alara's throat, a raw, guttural cry of maternal fury and despair. She didn't think. She launched herself towards her puppy, throwing her body over his tiny, trembling form. She was on her knees, her back to the bullies, using her own body as a human shield. No, leave him alone! She screamed, her voice cracking with tears. Brad laughed. Oh, look at that. The little waitress thinks she's a hero. He took a step closer and, with a contemptuous flick of his foot, he kicked her. Not hard enough to cause serious injury, but hard enough to jar her, to send a shock of pain and humiliation through her body. He kicked her exactly where she was trying to protect her dog. Get up. You're embarrassing yourself. That was the trigger. The final, unforgivable line. The scrape of a stool leg against the linoleum was the only warning. It was a soft sound, but it carried a finality that silenced everything. Finn Corrigan was now standing. He didn't stand up quickly or with anger. He rose with a slow, inexorable, terrifying grace. It was the motion of a battleship turning its guns. Every ounce of the relaxed stillness was gone, replaced by a focused, radiating energy that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His movement alone was a declaration of war. He turned and began to walk towards the booth. His steps were not rushed. They were measured, deliberate, and heavy with intent. The few other customers in the diner froze, their forks halfway to their mouths. The air grew thick, charged with a terrifying electricity. Brad and Chad, sensing the shift, turned their attention from the cowering waitress to the man now approaching them. They saw the uniform, and for a split second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed their faces. But their arrogance, a fortress built on a lifetime of never facing real consequences, quickly reasserted itself. Whoa. Easy there, soldier, Brad said, puffing out his chest. This doesn't concern you. We're just having a little chat with the waitress here. Finn stopped a few feet away, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. His gaze swept over the two of them, and it was not a look of anger. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was the look a man gives a venomous insect before he crushes it. He finally spoke, his voice a low, calm rumble that vibrated in the bones of everyone who heard it. "You have 3 seconds to apologize to the woman and the dog, and then you will pay your bill and leave." Chad snorted, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with his friend. "Or what, old man? You gonna call your commander? This is a civilian matter. Why don't you run along and play with your toy gun?" The word 3 never left Finn's lips. Instead, he moved. It was not a movement any of them could have anticipated. It was too fast, too efficient, too brutally clinical. As Chad took that step forward, Finn's left hand shot out not in a punch, but in an open-handed strike that looked almost gentle. It connected with the side of Chad's neck, right over the carotid artery. It was a precise, neurological shutdown. Chad's eyes rolled back in his head, and he dropped to the floor like a sack of potatoes, out cold before he even knew what hit him. The diner was dead silent. Brad stared, his jaw slack with disbelief. The reality of the situation, the sheer, terrifying capability of the man in front of him, was finally dawning. The color drained from his face. You killed him," he stammered, taking a stumbling step backward. "He'll wake up in a minute with a hell of a headache, and a lesson he should have learned as a child," Finn said, his voice still terrifyingly calm. He took a single step forward, closing the distance. Now, the apology. A Brad, driven by a surge of fear and a last vestige of foolish pride, swung a wild, telegraphed haymaker at Finn's head. It was the desperate, unskilled swing of a schoolyard bully who had never been in a real fight. Finn didn't block it. He didn't even seem to dodge it. He simply moved inside the arc of the punch, his head tilting slightly so the fist whistled harmlessly past his ear. In the same fluid motion, his right hand clamped around Brad's wrist like a steel vise. He twisted, applying pressure to the joint in a way that was exquisitely painful. Brad screamed a high-pitched, pathetic sound as he was forced to his knees. Finn leaned down, his mouth close to Brad's ear, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more frightening than any shout. "You kicked a woman," Finn whispered, the words laced with a venom that made Brad whimper. "You kicked a puppy. You are not men. You are stains. And if I ever see you within a mile of this diner, or this woman again, the headache I give you will be the last thing you ever feel. Do you understand the permanence of that statement?" Brad, sobbing now, his arm feeling like it was about to snap, could only nod frantically. Yes, I understand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Finn released his wrist with a shove that sent Brad sprawling onto the floor next to his unconscious friend. "The apology," Finn repeated, his gaze flicking towards Elara, who was still huddled over Kaiser, watching the scene with wide, shocked eyes. Brad scrambled onto his hands and knees, facing Elara. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for kicking you. I'm sorry for hurting your dog. It was stupid. We're stupid," he babbled, tears and snot streaming down his face. Just then, Chad began to stir, groaning on the floor. Finn reached down, grabbed a handful of his varsity jacket, and hauled him to his feet with effortless strength. Chad was disoriented, weak and terrified. Finn held him upright and pointed a finger at Elara. "Apologize." Chad, seeing his broken friend and feeling the iron grip of the seal, stammered out a terrified, I apologize. "I'm sorry. Now," Finn said, his voice returning to its normal, commanding tone. "You will take out your wallets. You will pay for your uneaten food. And you will leave a $500 tip for the waitress, for her trauma, and for the veterinary bill for the dog you assaulted." They didn't argue. They fumbled with their wallets, pulling out crumpled bills and credit cards, their hands shaking so badly they could barely hold them. They threw far more than $500 onto the table. Finn finally released Chad. "Get out. If you so much as look back, the rest of your day will become significantly more educational." They didn't need to be told twice. They stumbled over each other in their rush to the door, scrambling into their car, and peeling out of the parking lot with a screech of tires, leaving behind nothing but the money on the table and the profound, ringing silence in their wake. The moment they were gone, the atmosphere in the diner shifted again. The tension shattered, replaced by a stunned awe. One of the customers, an old man in a booth, began to clap slowly. Then another joined in, until the entire diner was filled with a soft, respectful round of applause. Finn ignored it. His work wasn't done. He turned and walked over to Elara, who was still on her knees. The terrifying warrior was gone, replaced by a man of profound gentleness. He knelt down in front of her, his large frame making him seem less intimidating, more grounded. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice soft. Elara could only shake her head, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Kaiser, my puppy." Finn looked at the little German shepherd, who was still trembling but was trying to lick Elara's face. Gently, Finn reached out his scarred, calloused hands moving with a surgeon's delicacy. He ran his fingers over the puppy's body, feeling for injury. Kaiser, sensing no threat, nuzzled into the man's hand. "I don't think anything's broken," Finn said after a moment. "He's scared, and he'll be sore, but he should be okay. A vet should still check him. Though," he gestured to the pile of money on the Bullies' table. "That should more than cover it." Elara finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude, shock, and awe. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Just a guy who was in the right place at the right time," he said, offering a small, rare smile. He helped her to her feet, his grip strong and steadying. Maggie, the owner, came out from behind the counter, her face pale but her eyes fierce. "Thank you," she said to Finn, her voice thick with emotion. "No one should have to go through that. No one." She then turned to Elara. "Honey, you take the rest of the week off, with pay. You and that little fella go home and rest." The story, of course, didn't end there. A customer had recorded the entire confrontation on their phone. In the age of social media, justice, or at least viral vindication, travels fast. The video, titled, "Navy SEAL Obliterates Bullies for Attacking Waitress and Puppy," exploded online. It garnered millions of views in hours. The faces of Brad and Chad were blurred, but their varsity jackets were not. The internet did its work, and they were identified, doxxed, and universally condemned. They were expelled from their college team, and eventually from the college itself. Their families, shamed and horrified, released public apologies. They became pariahs in their own community, a living lesson in the consequences of unchecked cruelty. But for Elara and Finn, the story took a different turn. He drove her and Kaiser to the vet that evening, waiting patiently to confirm the puppy was indeed just bruised and shaken. In the days that followed, he found reasons to extend his leave in Cedar Creek. He helped Elara find a new, pet-friendly apartment. He was there, a quiet, solid presence, as she used the money from the Bullies, which she insisted on splitting with him, an offer he flatly refused, to secure a deposit and her first month's rent. A local veterans charity, inspired by the story, reached out and offered her a better paying administrative job, one that would allow her to provide a more stable life for herself and Kaiser. On his last day in town, Finn stood with Elara outside her new apartment. The sun was setting, much like it had been that first day at the diner, but the feeling was entirely different. It was a sunset of peace, of new beginnings. Kaiser, now bouncing with healthy energy, wagged his tail furiously at Finn, chewing playfully on the laces of his boots. "I don't know how to ever thank you," Elara said, her voice soft. "You didn't just stand up for us that day. You changed my entire life." Finn looked down at her, and for the first time, the ice in his blue eyes had melted completely, replaced by a warm, deep fondness. "Some people spend their whole lives waiting for a chance to be a hero in a big, loud way," he said. "But the truest heroes are the ones who are quietly heroic every single day. You, Elara, protecting that puppy with your own body, that was the bravest thing I saw in my entire tour. I was just returning the favor." He gave Kaiser one last scratch behind the ears, nodded to Elara, and got into his car. He drove away not as a mythical avenger, but as a man who had done what was right. Elara watched him go, holding a happy, healthy Kaiser in her arms, standing in the doorway of her own home, her future brighter than it had ever been. It was a story of violence, yes, but more than that, it was a story about the enduring power of kindness, the swift, certain hand of justice, and the quiet strength that watches over us, often when we least expect it. This story touched millions because it speaks to a fundamental truth. We've all seen bullies, and we've all wished for someone to step in. To all of you watching, thank you for being a community that stands against cruelty. It makes me wonder, from which part of the country are you watching this video? Let me know in the comments below.